AITA for calling campus security on my biological parents at my own college graduation, and how it spiraled into a 2-year restraining order. I need to preface this by saying I never expected my life to turn into the kind of story people post on true crime forums. But here we are, and I think I need to get this all out somewhere because my therapist says writing it down helps. So here's the whole thing, from the beginning. No line breaks, because honestly, my brain doesn't work in paragraphs when I think about this anymore. It all just runs. Together, the way it happened. Fast and messy and terrifying. My name is Mara. Well, that's not my real name, obviously. I'm using a fake one for this post. And I was adopted when I was 3 years old. My biological parents were 19 and 20 when they had me. They were kids themselves, basically. And from everything I was told growing up, they signed the papers willingly. Nobody forced them, nobody tricked them. They just weren't ready, and they knew it, and they did what they thought was the responsible thing at the time. I don't hold that against them. I never did. Having kids is a hard situation, and I've always tried to see it with some grace. My adoptive parents, who I just call mom and dad because that's what they are to me, had spent years trying to have a biological child, and it never worked out. And then I came along and changed their whole world. They were never weird about the adoption thing. They told me from as early as I could understand language. They had books about it, they celebrated it, and my mom used to say this thing to me all the time growing up. She'd say, sometimes the person who gives you life isn't the person who raises you, and that's okay. That doesn't make either of them less real. I used to fall asleep to that sentence some nights when I was little and got curious about where I came from. When I turned 18, I found out I had the legal right to request identifying information about my biological parents through the adoption registry. I thought about it for maybe a week and then decided against it. Because honestly, my life felt complete, my family felt whole, and I didn't feel like I was missing some piece of myself that needed filling in. I want to be really clear about that because it matters. For what happened later, I was not searching for them. I was not curious in any active sense. I had made peace with not knowing, and I was fine with that. Fast forward to this past May. I graduated college, first person in my entire family, adoptive side, to get a 4-year degree. My parents were there. My grandparents drove 6 hours to be there. My aunt and uncle came too. Everyone was crying before I even walked across the stage because my dad is a crier and it's contagious. After the ceremony, we were out on the lawn taking pictures, the whole extended family clustered together, me still in my cap and gown, my mom fixing my hair for the 40th photo, when I noticed 2 people approaching us from the edge of the crowd. A man and a woman. Both looked to be in their early 40s, dressed a little too formally for a college lawn, like they'd put thought into the outfit. I didn't think anything of it at first. Campuses are crowded on graduation day. People cut through all the time. But they didn't cut through. They stopped right at the edge of our little photo circle and just stood there. And the woman was looking directly at me with this expression I can only describe as hungry, like she'd been waiting a long time for something and it was finally in front of her. Then she said my name. Not the name I go by now, not Mara, but the name I was given at birth, a name I hadn't heard out loud since I was a toddler, a name that only existed on a piece of paper somewhere in a sealed file. Hearing it come out of a stranger's mouth on the happiest day of my life felt like getting hit with cold water. I froze. My mom froze. My dad's hand tightened on my shoulder. The woman started talking fast, saying she was my mother, my real mother, that she and my father had made a terrible mistake all those years ago and they'd regretted it every single day since, that they had been searching for me for years and years, and now that I was 18 and free, they were here to bring me home, like I was a library book that was finally off hold. The man, my biological father apparently, was more aggressive about it. He said paper doesn't erase blood. He said they had every right to claim what was theirs. He used the word claim like I was property. I remember feeling like the ground had tilted under me, and then it got worse, because the woman said something that made my stomach drop even further. She said they'd been watching my social media for years, that they'd seen my high school graduation photos, they knew what college I went to, they knew my major, and they said they'd deliberately waited to approach until I was old enough, as if that made the years of silent surveillance okay, as if stalking. A minor's public profile from a distance and just biding time was some kind of respectful restraint on their part. I felt sick. My adoptive dad, who is usually the calmest man alive, stepped forward and told them very firmly that they needed to leave, that the people standing behind me were my parents, full stop, no asterisk, no debate. My biological father sneered and said something about calling campus security, which my dad actually did. He pulled out his phone right there on the lawn, and that seemed to be the thing that finally made them back off. Though not without my biological mother turning around and yelling that I was ungrateful, that I would regret this, before they walked off into the crowd like nothing had happened. My graduation photos that I'm supposed to treasure forever now have this asterisk on them in my memory, this shadow over what should have been one of the best days of my life. That night, we didn't really talk about it much. Everyone was shaken. We ended up just going back to the hotel and ordering room service because nobody had the stomach for the celebratory dinner we'd planned. The next morning, my best friend Priya called me crying because I'd texted her the basics the night before, and she immediately looped in her parents, because her dad is a retired police detective and her mom is a licensed therapist, which honestly turned out to be the luckiest break in this whole nightmare because they knew exactly what steps to take. Priya's dad told us the first thing we needed to do was go back to campus and try to get any video or photos from bystanders near where the confrontation happened, because parking lot cameras, other families filming their own graduations who might have caught us in the background, anything helps establish a timeline and a pattern later if this escalated. So my dad and I actually drove back to the campus 2 days later and canvassed the area. We found a family who'd been filming their own daughter's photos nearby, and they generously shared a clip that showed the two strangers approaching us, which ended up being crucial later. I'll get to that. Priya's mom, meanwhile, sat me down and told me flatly, "Don't respond to any contact, document everything, and lock down every account you have." So that's what I did. I went through my social media and discovered something that made my skin crawl. My old accounts, ones I hadn't touched since high school, had clearly been viewed obsessively. There were friend requests from accounts with no profile pictures and generic names that had been sitting in my requests folder for literal years. Accounts I now believe belonged to them or people connected to them. I set everything to private. I deleted every pending request I didn't recognize. And within the week, I'd changed my phone number entirely, which was a hassle because I had to update it with my bank, my job, everyone. But it felt necessary. 2 days after the graduation confrontation, my biological mother found a way to message me anyway, through a family member's Facebook account that wasn't blocked yet. A long, rambling message paired with 3 photos of me as a newborn in the hospital, tiny and wrapped in a hospital blanket, clearly meant to tug at something in me, to remind me that she'd held me first. It didn't tug at anything except my anxiety. 3 days after that, my biological father sent a message demanding we meet for coffee to talk like adults, as if showing up uninvited at my graduation and calling me by a name I hadn't answered to since toddlerhood was the behavior of a reasonable adult. Around the same time, I found a comment from my biological mother buried under an old photo on my Instagram, one from over a year earlier, just sitting there, some vague comment about how beautiful I'd become, clearly left as a kind of public marker, a way of staking a claim in a space where other people could see it, even though I hadn't posted anything new in weeks and nobody would have found it unless they were actively digging through my entire post history. That's when it really sank in, that this wasn't a one-time emotional outburst at a graduation. This was a pattern. This was calculated, and it was going to keep going unless something stopped it. And it did keep going, and it got so much worse. About a week after I started my new job at a marketing firm downtown, on I think my 8th day, my biological mother showed up at my office. Not just lingered outside, she actually walked into the lobby and left a massive flower arrangement at the front desk with a card attached. The card had her home address written on it, a house I later learned was only about 20 minutes from my office, and it was signed Mom. My actual coworker at the front desk had no idea what to make of it and just held on to it until I got out of a meeting. I immediately took photos of the card and the flowers and reported the whole thing to my supervisor, who, without hesitation, looped in building security and had them pull the lobby camera footage. I remember standing in that hallway, holding a bouquet of flowers I never wanted, feeling like I might throw up. That weekend, my adoptive mom and I went out for a quiet lunch at a restaurant that was, and I want to stress this because it matters, 40 minutes away from my biological parents' house in the opposite direction of where we lived. There was no logical reason for them to be anywhere near that restaurant unless they had followed us or been tracking us somehow. Halfway through our meal, I looked up and saw them walking straight toward our table. My biological mother started crying loudly, dramatically, right there in the middle of a packed restaurant. And she grabbed the arm of a passing manager and sobbed that I was being trafficked and that I was being brainwashed by the woman sitting across from me, my own mother, who has raised me since I was 3 years old. The manager, bless him, threatened to call the police on the spot, and that finally got them moving toward the exit, but not before my biological father shot me a look I still think about sometimes, this mix of entitlement and fury, like I had personally wronged him by existing outside of his control. A few days after that, my biological mother showed up at my apartment complex, standing in the lobby holding a gift bag, trying to convince the doorman to let her up to my unit. The doorman, thankfully, held firm and refused, and I called the police, who came out and took a full report of the incident. That night, my adoptive dad drove over with a toolbox and installed a deadbolt and a video doorbell on my door, working late into the evening without complaint, because that's the kind of dad he is. On top of all that, my biological mother apparently tracked down my aunt, my adoptive mom's sister, through some combination of social media sleuthing and old-fashioned nosiness, and sent her a series of messages accusing my adoptive parents of stealing me and demanding that my aunt convince me to come home to my real family. My aunt, appalled, forwarded every message straight to us and told my biological mother in no uncertain terms to never contact her again. By this point, it was clear we needed more than door locks and blocked numbers. We needed the law involved. We hired an attorney named Nicole Holloway, who specialized in harassment and restraining order cases, and she filed for a temporary restraining order almost immediately after reviewing everything we'd documented. My biological parents, in response, hired their own lawyer, and their defense, as it was explained to us, boiled down to painting themselves as grieving parents who had been promised by the original adoption agency that contact would be permitted once I turned 18. As if that promise, even if it existed, gave them license to show up unannounced at my job, my home, and my graduation. The first hearing was intense. My biological mother cried through most of it, putting on what felt like a performance for the judge, talking about lost years and a mother's love and second chances. But Nicole had built an airtight case. She laid out everything in order: the graduation confrontation with the video from the bystander family, the flowers at my office with the address card, the restaurant incident with statements from restaurant staff, the police report from the apartment lobby, the video doorbell footage, the messages to my aunt, all of it, time-stamped and organized. The judge did not take long to reach a decision. She stated plainly that the pattern of behavior showed a deliberate and repeated disregard for clear boundaries, and she granted a 1-year restraining order requiring my biological parents to stay at least 500 feet away from me at all times. No contact of any kind, direct or through third parties. I remember sitting in that courtroom feeling like I could finally breathe for the first time in weeks. That feeling did not last long. Exactly 5 days after the order was granted, I came home to find a handwritten letter, 3 full pages long, taped to my apartment door. My biological mother's handwriting, looping and urgent, going on about how the court didn't understand real love, how she would never stop trying, how I would understand someday when I was older. 3 days after that, my biological father sent a scathing email straight to my work email address, a place he definitely had no legitimate reason to have access to, accusing my new employer of enabling my estrangement from my real family. We went back to court for a violation hearing, and this time the judge was visibly angry. Not performative anger, genuine frustration at watching 2 adults deliberately test the boundaries of a legal order less than a week after it was issued. She called it a calculated attempt to circumvent the law, and extended the restraining order to 2 full years. And she told them directly, in open court, that any further violation would result in criminal contempt charges and potential jail time. I heard afterward, through Nicole, that my biological parents' own attorney nearly withdrew from the case at that point out of sheer frustration with how stubborn and uncooperative his clients were being, apparently telling them bluntly that they were making his job impossible. A few months later, and I genuinely could not believe this when I heard it, my biological parents filed a motion asking the court to modify the order to allow them to send 1 letter per year through their attorney's office, framing it as a reasonable compromise. The judge denied it outright, without much discussion, essentially telling them the time for compromise had passed. Around that same period, my biological mother's own sister, an aunt I'd never met and never asked to hear from, reached out to me on LinkedIn of all places, presumably trying a new angle since every other channel had been cut off. I blocked her within about 30 seconds of reading the message. Through all of this, I started seeing a therapist regularly, someone Priya's mom actually recommended, because I needed a space to process not just the stress of the legal battle, but this deeper, unsettled feeling underneath it all, this fear that maybe my adoptive parents thought I secretly wanted to go find my roots, that maybe some part of them worried I'd choose blood over the family that raised me. So I sat my parents down one evening, just the 3 of us, and we talked for almost 2 hours straight, really talked, about fear and loyalty and what family actually means. And by the end of it, whatever quiet worry my mom had been carrying about losing me to strangers who share my DNA was gone, completely dissolved, because I made sure she heard directly from me how unshakable my certainty was about who my real parents are. We decided, as a family, that we didn't want the anniversary of my graduation to forever carry the memory of that ambush on the lawn, so instead we created something new. Every January now, we celebrate what we call Adoption Day, the actual date I officially became their daughter, with a little tradition of dinner and this ridiculous tradition where we watch home videos from when I was tiny and just settling into their house. And it's become one of my favorite days of the year, a day that belongs entirely to us and nobody else. Life since then has genuinely gotten so much better. I got promoted at work, first to project lead, and just a few months ago to senior marketing specialist, a title I worked hard for and am proud of. I stood up as maid of honor at Priya's wedding this spring, wore a dress I actually loved for once, and gave a toast that made half the room cry, in a good way this time. I also moved in with my boyfriend into a bigger, more secure apartment building, one with actual staffed security at the front desk, which after everything felt less like an upgrade and more like a necessity, though it's been nice having the extra space too. At Priya's wedding, during my toast, I said something that I've thought about a lot since, something that just came out of me in the moment, but that I meant with my whole chest. I said that family was never really about DNA or a blood test, that real family is the people who answer the phone at 2 a.m, who sit next to you in a courtroom, who show up with a toolbox to change your locks without being asked twice, who just show up, period, over and over, without needing a reason. I think about that a lot now, especially on the nights when I still find myself checking that the deadbolt is turned, an old habit that hasn't quite faded yet. My biological parents are still out there somewhere, restrained by a court order that has, so far, held. I don't know what happens when it expires, whether they'll try again, whether I'll need to renew it, whether this is truly over or just paused. But I know who my family is. I've never once doubted that, not for a second. Not even when two strangers stood on a college lawn and tried to use a name I no longer answer to as a key back into a life that was never theirs to walk into.